Welcome to Milspouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to telling the stories of military families, one spouse at a time. Need some inspiration as you navigate military life? Moves, deployments, raising military kids, keeping your marriage together, career issues, and more? Get an encouraging, humorous outlook from a spouse who's been there for 30 years and more moves than she can count. Join host Jen McDonald, author of the book You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse who knows that we're stronger together. Grab your cup of coffee or a glass of wine and sit back and relax as Jen talks with military spouses, both new and experienced, who will give you real-life hope and support for your own Milspouse journey.
Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Milspouse Matters. I'm Jen McDonald, and today I'm so glad to be talking to Christine Barker Anderson, who I call Chris because I've known her for a long time. So Chris is a mom of 4 and grandmommy to 24 with one on the way. She was married to Air Force Chaplain Lonnie Barker for nearly 32 years until his unexpected death in 2009 while they were stationed in Germany. Chaplain Barker was deployed several times, including to Iraq and Kuwait. They'd been stationed all around the world during their marriage, and by the time their youngest daughter was 17, they'd moved 11 times and lived in locations like Arkansas, New York, Korea, Hawaii, North Dakota, Alabama, California, Texas, Guam, DC, and Germany. Chris graduated from Life Pacific College with a degree in children's ministry and a minor in music, and is an amazing musician and beloved piano teacher. In fact, she taught several of my children. After 7 years as a widow, she married Mark Anderson, who had also lost his spouse. They currently reside in the San Diego area. You can find some of her writing at notesbychristine.blogspot.com. So just a note, today's show is a little different. I wanted to bring Chris on to talk about how she dealt with her husband's sudden death and how her family coped with it and the time period after that. And I really think this will be a great help to anybody going through a tragedy. Like I said, I've known her for a long time and I look up to her so much, and I'm so privileged to share her story with you. So after that long introduction, welcome, Chris.
Hi, it's good to be here.
I'm so glad you agreed to come on. We were talking earlier about where we met, and we realized our families were both stationed in Guam in 2002 for a couple of years. So that's quite a while ago. And then Chaplain Barker was our chaplain. You were my friend and taught my kids piano. And then we were stationed together again in Germany. We got there in 2008, and we were there during the time period where he passed away.
Yes.
So it's just been such a privilege to know you all, and we think so much of your family.
Thank you, Jen. Well, we love you guys too. We love you all, your family, your children. It's a privilege and a blessing to be here with you today.
Oh, thanks so much. So before we get into, we've obviously talked about the fact that he did pass away, but before we get to that part of the story, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and if you had any background with the military at all.
I didn't. I grew up in Montana, and I lived there for 18 years. Just a little town, Miles City, Montana, about 10,000 people. I think there's less now. And so I went to Los Angeles to go to Bible college. And that is where I met my husband, Lonnie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So did you get married while you were still in college or after?
When I was a senior in college, we got married. Yeah. Yes, we did.
And I know chaplains have to go through, they have to be certified by their denomination, right?
Right. And so you also have to get your Master of Divinity or a master's degree. So after we left Bible college, after we graduated, we went and pastored a church. He pastored a church in Trinidad, Colorado for 1 year. And then we went to Springfield, Missouri, where he worked on getting his master's degree at the Assembly of God Graduate School.
So you had already gotten used to this little nomadic life of kind of picking up and going.
Yes. We met each other and married lived in California, and then we lived in Colorado and then in Missouri. Yeah. But we were in Missouri just for 1 year. He really wanted to pastor again, so he found a way to pastor in St. Louis, Missouri, and still work on his master's degree, and was able to actually get it quicker than if he had done it all in residency, which I was pretty impressed with that.
Oh. And he went into the Air Force from Missouri? Is that where you all decided to do that?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
how did that come about?
Well, when we lived in Colorado, we were in Trinidad, which is south of Colorado Springs. And Lonnie always had this desire to serve in the military. He went and met with a chaplain up the Air Force Academy, and he was concerned about the children. He said to this chaplain, he said, "I've always been interested, but I'm concerned about the children and how does it affect them?" And this chaplain just said to him, he said, "If you and your wife are taking care of your relationship and doing the best you can on that, your children are going to be just fine." And he also said something that didn't that held true for us, but then the other thing he said was, "You'll probably just get one deployment," because it was before everything started happening in the world. But he said, "You probably just have one deployment, so it's just that, and then otherwise you'll just have little TDYs here and there, but nothing like we ended up having." So that was back in the day.
We did not know what we were signing up for.
That's right.
You guys have 4 amazing kids who are all grown, and obviously a plethora of grandchildren.
Yes. That's the combination of Mark's family and my family now. Yeah.
But you do have a lot of grandchildren.
Yes, we do. Yes, we're very blessed. We have on my side now. It'll be the 17th that's being born. I think I have this right.
Yes.
now I'm afraid with numbers, but anyway, So
we don't want to leave anybody out.
So we have 25 grandchildren.
That's wonderful.
With, including the one on the way. Yeah.
Wow. And then your children, you want to talk a little bit about them? They're all pretty amazing after growing up in the military. So, which is good for other people to hear because they think, is my kid going to be okay?
Oh, yes, I know. It's so true. So Jeremy's my oldest son, and he's married to Crystal, and I know you've met them both. And Jeremy's a pilot, and they have 4 amazing sons. Jason is a chaplain in the Air Force, and he just moved to Texas, and they have 2 boys, 2 girls, he and Sunny. Sunny's amazing. And now they're the ones who have a little surprise baby that we're so excited about on the way. And we're so excited about that. And Jennifer is married to Benji, and they're planting a church in Encinitas, California, and are doing amazing. She's about ready to drop a song called Fire, which and we're really, really excited about that. And they have 3 little girls and 1 boy. And then my youngest is Tiffany. She's married to Zach, and they live here in California as well. And they have 4 children. They have 2 sons and 2 daughters. And one of their little ones passed away recently, and it was very sad for us. But we always remember our little Ruby up in heaven. So they're just a precious family.
All your kids and their families just are such a great example, I think, of, kids following their passions and being encouraged by their parents. And they seem really comfortable with moving and going wherever they feel like God wants them to go, which, it's that 2-edged thing with your kids. Cause I know my kids are the same way where you want them to embrace life and adventure and then they leave you and you go, well, but it's a typical military brat thing. I really do believe the ones that come through great, they're just like open to whatever. So
I remember a point in time in our career where we were struggling about, well, should we get out now because we're going to start just leaving kids here, there, and everywhere. And then that passage of scripture came up. Lonnie was studying about it, and he was ready to put in his, resignation, get out and do that. And where it talked about the children of Israel were afraid to go into the promised land. And part of their excuse was the women and the children. Oh. And then God says to them, he says, don't use women and your children as an excuse to not follow me. And we just felt like that was a word for us, that God was going to take care of our children. We just needed to be obedient to what he had for us to do and not to use them as an excuse not to follow him.
That's so good. And when I met you, I believe Matthew, my oldest, was only about 11. And so you just had your youngest one still with you. And I remember talking to you about this because I'm going, how can you live so far away? And you just were super honest. You said, it's really hard. And, we love them and we miss them, because you kind of can look at other people that are able to move overseas and leave their kids. And you think, well, they must not be as close as we are. You think in your
Yeah.
mind, there's just no way I could do that. And you never know what you can do until you're faced with it, obviously. And
Yes.
you guys lived all around the world. And so tell me, I don't know, I bet all your kids would have a different answer, but what was your favorite assignment in the military?
Oh, that is such a tough question for me. And I've been asked it so many times, and I really cannot tell you
Yes.
what's my favorite, because I think it's because of the people. You
Yeah.
meet different people everywhere you live. And I mean, even North Dakota, which is so frigid and cold and tough sometimes to live there when your wind chill factor is just unbelievable, way below zero. But it's the friends that you make along the way. And I did love living at Vandenberg because we were close to family, and that was one of the bases. Yeah, that's in California. So we were close to my brother and sisters, and just different family members, some of Lonnie's family members. And that was really sweet to be able to actually drive to see them rather than to have to drive all the way across the country to see them.
Or fly.
Or fly. Yeah. So that was pretty special for us, but we really did enjoy every assignment. And I have to say it was because of the amazing people that we met along the way. And even in the harder places, there was something very special about that.
Yes. And you're so much like my husband, because he will not pinpoint a location. It's like it's what you make of it, that positive attitude. So, well, I know that Lonnie had been in how many years before he died?
Going on 23.
And you were at the point of planning for retirement. For military retirement.
Yes, we were always, one of our things was we would take the map and say, okay, where should we live? It was sort of a hobby. We just get out we loved mountains, and we loved Montana and Wyoming. But it was just our hobby to figure out where we were going to live when we got done. Yes.
Yes. So I know when he passed away in 2009, we were stationed nearby, and, we're part of your community when that happened. Yes. And I know things ended up differently for you than you all had planned, because you were talking about retirement and talking about where you were going to build a house or whatever. And, he unexpectedly died. You had no warning. It was just a tragic thing that happened. So I don't know how much you want to talk about that time period, or even just about how him dying sent all of your plans in a totally different direction, and what that time period was like.
Yeah, it really was such a unexpected thing that happened in our life. We were looking forward to the future, and one of my sons was going to come and live with us over in Germany and do an assignment there. We were going to go do some traveling. We talked about going to Italy for Christmas, and so there was it was like a bomb went off in my life, but in a way that. I remember when it happened, I was just so grateful for the friends that God had brought into our life, and especially through Lonnie had started this group. It was a life group type of thing, and we would meet every other Friday, and they'd come to our house. And I am so thankful that we had this group of friends who just surrounded me, because here we are, we're in a different country, we're far away from my kids and family, and they just surrounded me with their love, and you were part of that, Jen. I'll never be able to tell you and all those sweet, precious friends how thankful I am. I could never express it in words.
It was truly our privilege, because you just pour into everybody else, without reservation, and just to feel like anything we could have done was helpful is such a blessing. And I know there were several things that happened around that time, because and this is something I will say I remember about you during that time, because they had brought you to our friend's house to stay while you're waiting for your family to fly over, so you wouldn't be alone. Everybody was just devastated. It's just devastating. And I think it was like whoever the military liaison was coming in to talk to you about details or whatever. I don't even know if you remember this at all. So you were just sitting in a chair, and it wasn't like you weren't grieving. I mean, and I don't want to make it sound like you were perfect. And, that's part of normal process. Obviously you were in shock, but through your tears, I think he had walked in, and you knew him, and you just grabbed his arm and you said, I just don't want you to doubt God's love for you. And you kind of looked around the whole room and I just remember thinking, there's no way I would have had the presence of mind to do this. You were just said, all you have to remember, God is still good. And Lonnie would not want you to think any differently. And I don't want you to think any differently. And you were so concerned with how everybody else was doing. I mean, we were all bawling, you know, and just to think that when you come through a hard time, whatever you are on the inside comes up, and that's just who you are. I just remember thinking, that's not how I would be. I would probably be so angry and bewildered and just all those things, which I'm sure there were those feelings too. But what you expressed was just this constant concern for how everybody else was doing. And that was so amazing to me.
Well, thank you, Jen. And I just remember even just at the house when there was a general and his wife that came, and he gave me a hug, and he just said to me, the steadfast love of the Lord never changes. His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. He said that verse, Lamentations 3:22 and 23. He whispered those in my ear as I was getting ready to leave the house. And, I remember driving in the car and I almost felt like I was in the fetal position, I just crying out, and how am I going to, for the children, and oh my word, my heart was just broken. But just to know that even in the midst of the worst of times, that God's love is there for us. And it was just poured out by the people around me. I remember when the youth group from Germany, they just surrounded the house. I didn't see them do it, but I heard that they had done it and were praying. Oh. And I remember when Grace and Anna came in, and Grace just crawled in my lap. Your daughter, Grace,
I remember that.
She just crawled in my lap, and we just cried together. It was just so sweet. Just, it was, it was a moment I'll never forget. And I tell people about all the time, and how precious just to know that God hears our prayers. And in the midst of the hardest and darkest and deepest times, He's there with us, and His love really does. It's there, and His mercies are new every morning, even on mornings when we don't even want to get out of bed. We don't want to, the reality sets in again that, He's gone, just having that assurance was, in so many ways, just helped me walk through that.
And one of the things, I don't know if we mentioned, all of your children were grown, so they weren't there until, took some time for them to fly over. I think your oldest son and his wife come and help you go back to the States to make arrangements. But yes, you didn't have family there other than your husband. And one thing, I was looking at your site, because I know you aren't writing a lot on there, but if you're listening and you're going through something tragic, or you've lost someone, I would really encourage you, and we'll mention it again at the end and mention it in the show notes by Christine.blogspot.com. And she says she started this blog to share her thoughts as she goes through this great unknown trail of grief. And one of the posts, I was just kind of looking through it again, because one of the things you said, it kind of goes along with what you just said. You said, I will never really be able to put all the pieces of this puzzle together, but I know God is the one who understands and is putting things right for all eternity. I trust Him, and there is no other that I can turn to but Him. Just a second.
That's true.
Daily, I need Him and desire to know His heart and His love, even when things happen that I don't understand. And I know that it's easy to say those things and to say those things to others, but when you've really been through it and have had to trust God for the next step because you don't know what else is coming, I would just say, go to her site and just read, and you're going to find somebody that totally understands grief. And maybe talk too a little bit about, you were surrounded by friends, and you had some little things that would happen here and there where I think you called them, not coincidences, but you had another term for them, I think.
I had some special things that happened. I felt like God was showing His presence to me. And it's when you listen to Lonnie's messages when he along the way, and probably Jen, you remember this, he would often speak about the presence, the promise of God's presence in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And he also would use, there was a phrase he often used about keeping our eyes on eternity, realizing that it's all about keeping our eyes and our hearts set on the eternity, the eternal life. And there were things that God did for us that were just incredible. Like, for instance, I told you about the verse, the steadfast love of the Lord never changes. When I went back to Germany to close out my house with my friend Terry, and then I went to get my car, and I was going to make sure it was all cleaned out so that it could be transferred over to the United States.
Yeah.
And there was one piece of paper in my car, and it was a bulletin from a Sunday in July. I think it was July 9th.
Wow.
Where Lonnie had spoken. But it was a traditional service, so it was like there was verses in it that were pre-printed, and one of the verses was highlighted, was that particular verse. But I didn't know it. I took the piece of paper in my hand, and it swept out of my hand and went underneath the car.
Oh, no.
So I ran around to the other side, and it was in January, so there was snow everywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for a white piece of paper on the ground, and all of a sudden it just is fluttering on the ground, and I go and pick it up. I took it inside the house, and I was just looking at this piece of paper, and that verse, it was almost, you know how sometimes you look at words and it's like they're just highlighted.
Yeah.
And that there was that verse, and to me, it was just another reminder. God was just reminding me in the midst of trying to close out my house in Germany, having gone back after all the services and everything, that, the steadfast love of the Lord never changes.
That's so amazing.
And then, it was really special. I went running in. It was at Lori's house, and you may have been there, but I went running in, and I was just like, "Can you believe this? This verse, it's right here." It was so exciting.
Well, and you have your eyes open to see those things. That's the other thing.
And the reason I was visiting my son, I was staying with my son. My children were a lifeline to me during all this time. But it was in December, and he had little Dove chocolates. And do you remember the chocolates? They had little sayings inside of them.
Yes.
And this particular one was, "Blessings only come to those who notice."
Mm-hmm.
And it was written by some woman in Texas, which I always feel bad because I don't know her name, but blessings only come to those who notice.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like God was he was saying to me, notice.
Oh, wow.
Notice the blessings that are all around you.
Yeah.
In the middle of your grief, just keep your eyes open to notice the blessings.
That's so amazing.
And there were things that happened, like for my kids, they would tell me things like my daughter she was going to run a marathon. Jennifer was going to run a marathon in honor of her daddy. And every time she'd come around a corner, there was this hummingbird that it became something for her when she would be running and preparing, and it would just stop. And she just felt like God was saying something to her through that.
Wow.
The song "Blessed Assurance" was Lonnie's favorite hymn.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times, like there was the end of a service up in Massachusetts, and it was all about what we have to go through with suffering. It was wonderful. It was a really good sermon, and the song that they sang at the end was "Blessed Assurance."
Wow.
And Jeremy just told me he just broke down when that song came on. Zach and Tiffany were out in the backyard in Alabama, and all of a sudden they hear church bells ringing, and the song that it's playing it was the Sunday after Lonnie passed. It was "Blessed Assurance."
Wow.
So when the people the house that they were at, when they came home, they said, "We heard church bells ringing in your backyard. You know, we could hear them." And the song that it was playing was "Blessed Assurance." And they said, "We've never heard church bells in our backyard before."
Oh my goodness.
It was incredible, just the little things. And one day, Tiffany and I went to the gravesite, and there was someone had left a yellow rose at the gravesite where Lonnie's buried, along with a rosary. And we didn't know. That was really, really sweet.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, Jason sends me a poem written he's living up in Washington.
Right.
So Tiffany and I are in Alabama. This gal wrote this poem about a rose. And as I'm reading the rose, I'm thinking of a red rose and how it fell, and how it's a beautiful poem that she wrote. And at the very end, she says that it's a yellow rose.
Oh, wow.
And to me, that was just like, it blew my mind that it wasn't, for some reason, as I started reading the poem, And then it reminded me of that yellow rose that we found that someone just left. We don't know who left it,
Right.
to honor Lonnie, but there were just things that, and God continues to do. Like this morning when I was doing my devotions, the words I was reading Psalm 57, and the words that came out just this morning were about God's love and his faithfulness. It goes so much along with the other verse, the Lamentations verse about God's love and his faithfulness. God truly has shown his love and his faithfulness in the worst of times.
Yes. Well, and I think the question I would have too, and I think I know the answer because I know you, but people that don't know you, I mean, it had to have been a temptation to be like, why us? Why me? Why do we have to go through this? You had no warning and it was so unexpected.
Yeah.
So how did you deal with those thoughts during that time?
I did ask those questions. I talked to God a lot about it. I don't understand. I don't get it. Why? Why are my children having to go through?
Mm-hmm.
They're having babies and things that Lonnie would have just loved to have held and played with. He just loved children, and I don't understand why he's not here to be there for them when they have questions. He was a lot of times Jeremy, Jason. I mean, they all were. Besides being a parent, when you grow up in the military, and you move around so much, you also become each other's best friends in a lot of ways. And so I feel like sometimes that they lost one of their very best friends besides losing their daddy.
Yeah.
So those questions came up often, and someone sent me a plaque that, and it's the verse we all know: "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths."
That's one of my favorite verses.
I just had to realize that I will never understand.
Mm-hmm.
I can't lean on my own understanding. I just need to trust in God and keep trusting in him, and to know that he will put the pieces of the puzzle together
one day.
So, I think about, one character in the Bible, that not that I'm in any way like Job whatsoever, but I do remember how he questioned God over, about things, questions. And then God turns it around and starts saying to him, well, were you there when I put the snow in the clouds? And were you there when I, did this and created that? And were you there? And so God, even though Job was asking a lot of questions, and I think God is just fine with our questions.
Yes.
Then God answers back, or he talks to Job, but he doesn't answer his questions. He just shows that, to me, it just shows that he knows.
Yes.
And that's the one that's the most important.
Right.
God knows, he cares, he loves. He loved Lonnie more than, anyone. And Lonnie's safe in his arms, and he loves us all, and he wants us to just know we're safe in him.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I think you're one of the few people I know that truly live out what you say you believe. Like I said, it came to the surface during that crisis, and who you really are and what you believe, it just showed, So I think one of the questions too I had for you, because I don't know that I've talked to you about this. So this all happened and you come through this horrible time, and everybody kind of rallies around, and you have the services, and then your whole life had changed because you had an identity as a military spouse, as a chaplain's wife, and suddenly that's been taken from you, really. So that time period after, how did you know what to do next? Or did you just, how did you work through that time?
Yeah. And my situation is probably very different from others because we were living over in Germany. Yes. And so I immediately am taken from my home, and I go, and that's where my children are just amazing. They just welcome me into their homes. And all of our household goods, everything was put in storage for 2.5 years, where I think about people who they've lost a loved one, they go back to their home. It's just filled with everything. And I feel for them because everywhere you turn, you just see that person that you've lost, But what I experienced was I went and lived with my children who I lived with Jeremy, with Jason, with Jen, and with Tiffany, and they all lived, one in Massachusetts, one in Missouri, one in California, and one in Washington.
You were
with
traveling
their
a
families.
lot.
I was traveling a lot, yeah. And my little car that Lonnie surprised me with in Germany, I drove it lots and lots of places. And as babies were being born, I would be there for months.
Wow.
And the thing about my children that I am so appreciative, not only I'm not the only one that's grieving, they as well, they're grieving as well. So for me, we were able to grieve together. We were able to go through it together. And I never felt any resentment from them for me just coming and being part of their home.
They probably were so happy to have you, I'm sure.
I will be forever grateful for the way that they helped me through it. And I was trying to figure out where should I live? And I wanted to make sure that, I just wanted to know where the Lord would have me to be. So eventually I ended up in California and with Jen, we're near Jen and Benji, which I'm grateful because Jeremy now has moved from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania, and Jason has, moved all over the place because he's in the military. Yeah. And then Tiffany is now in California. So I'm so grateful that the Lord settled me here. Yeah. And then after I got here, I was able to buy a home. And then after 2.5 years is when everything was delivered to my house. And then that was another way of just going through things and
having that space.
Unpacking. Yeah.
So that had to be interesting to go through everything after that much time had passed.
Yes. Yeah. It was. It was. Because you know how it is in the military. Yeah. You move from house to house, but you still try to set your house up. One of my sons said to me, where's the wall? When we came to a new house, it was after he was off to college. I had a certain wall where certain pictures were always on a wall somewhere. You know how in the military you move around and you still want it to seem like home, even though it's a different house. And so now I'm moving into another home, but this time it's my home without Lonnie, so it's just, but still he's just everywhere. So as far as all of his things, it was, I had a sweet friend who came and helped me, my friend Terry, and she helped me move in, and I'm so grateful for her help and her love. Yes.
Well, you are well loved. That's for sure. Well, and I'm wondering too, you mentioned your children, obviously they were all grown. So did anything come up with how the family dealt with the death that surprised you, or that you could maybe speak to for other people going through it, something to look out for, or something you might have done differently or just weren't aware of until you went through it?
The thing with Lonnie's death, it was just so unexpected. And I feel like we were flying by the seat of our pants, if you know what I mean. There was no way of planning really for what was going on. So I think the thing that we just tried to do was just live day by day, to help one another, to realize that we're going through, there's so many emotions going on. Each child was going through different things, even in their personal life. So I think some of the children weren't even able to grieve until later on. And I think that's one thing that's really important about the whole thing about grieving. It's different for every individual, even for people of the same family. People, just with what they're going through, is the grieving process and we just need to allow for people to have the freedom to grieve when they can, and how they are, but just to be there for one another. And I think that one thing that was good was when friends and people came along and were just there for you. How people would just come and they would either just sit with you or, and I know I'm going in a different direction.
No, that's perfect. I was actually going to ask you, like, if someone was wanting to know how to help, because, I had, so Tara House was on the show, and her daughter was in an accident last year and was paralyzed. And so, this is something that just happened suddenly. And they had retired and lived near their family. And I made the comment, I said, oh, well, that's so great because at least your family was there. And she said, it was great. But all I kept thinking was, if we were still active duty, how much the community would be there, because they know how to do emergencies, because they really do know how to rally around and bring in food and take care of things and, take your car to get gas or whatever. They'll just do it. It's such
Right.
an
That's
ingrained
true.
part of the military
Yeah.
family culture. So
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
speak to if somebody's wondering how to help, what helps and maybe what doesn't. I mean, I know you're a very nice person, so you don't have to, but I mean, there may be some inclinations that people have that may not be the best thing to do in that moment. So,
Yeah. Well, just being there for people and not always feeling like you have to have the
yeah.
answers. I think that's a good thing. If you're feeling compelled to write a note or a card or anything like that, because I saved every card that I got and that I
Oh,
received, and so often there were verses or things that just were repeated. It was awesome to be able to see that, just to see God using people from different places,
yeah.
using the words that they're sending. What you did for me, you filled an iPod full of music that just soothed my soul.
Oh,
I listened to that iPod every night as I was going to bed, and often I would wake up in the middle of the night and there'd be certain songs that would be playing, and often it was Blessed Assurance.
hmm
I would just wake up. There were things like that people did. So notes, and especially because with the military, all of a sudden you're swept away from a military base,
yes.
surrounded by military people, and you're in different communities and you don't know anybody, because I was in different
Right.
communities. So it was really, really neat to see when I went to Massachusetts, the church there that my son was going to, they brought in meals for the family when they came back.
hmm
And that was so sweet. Meals are always something that's wonderful.
Yes.
Sometimes just to be able to come into a home and see if there's some practical way of helping, or packing up things,
hmm
or going through things. It is such a personal thing. So you do want to touch you may want to, and then again, you may want to just pack it up and look at it later on.
So
So
maybe just
I
ask.
think,
Maybe ask.
yeah, just that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, there's sometimes you just take your cues also from people,
hmm
as far as what is good and what is not. And I think when you said about the things that hurt,
hmm
I think it's just when people say things without really thinking it through,
Yeah.
just kind of off the cuff of like, what do you think he did to have that happen? What you think, what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think one of my
or another,
unfavorite ones is God need another angel in heaven. You just go, really?
yeah.
And they
Yeah.
mean well.
Another person just said, well, you just have to get used to it. And it was like not too long after
Oh
he
my goodness.
passed. And I was like, well, that's true, but at this point, it's not what I want to hear.
Right.
With life without Lonnie didn't even seem possible, and for our children to have lost their father seemed more than I could
Yeah.
bear, let alone just get used to
Yeah.
it. So, but that's another woman who had lost her husband maybe a few years before. She'd said something like, well, I'm happier now than I've ever been.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
Well,
oh my
that's not the thing
goodness.
you say to somebody that just lost their husband.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
It's sort of like that. There's a book that says "Don't Sing to a Heavy Heart," or I'm not sure I've got the title right, but
We'll find it
there are
out
just
and put
times,
it
yeah,
in the show notes for sure.
There's just a time when you maybe you don't say anything if you don't, I'm sure it's all well-meaning. I'm sure that she was just trying to say to me somehow, maybe to give me hope that there would be happiness someday, but our words.
Well, and I think that's something what you said about just being there, because it can feel like it's not enough, but that may just be just people's presence, and that they let you know how much they love you. And, we've been faced with this several times with friends and family, and it is so tempting to try to say something and you just go, I just need to be quiet. Another thing is, and this is just like right in the aftermath, especially when people have their family coming in. And I think somebody had suggested this to me, and I try to do this, is just show up with like paper goods and, paper towels and paper plates and cups and just things that they're going to need, and that they're going to use toilet paper, like very practical.
Right.
But they don't have to have
okay.
somebody go run out to the store. Just showing up with things like that, or breakfast, or if they have a house full of people that have come into town. So
It's good. And my friend Sheila, you know, the
Yes.
first night after Lonnie passed, she comes to the house and says, "You're just not going to be alone
I
tonight."
remember
And
that.
she stayed. She was with me. I mean, just being there, presence, and was incredible.
Yes.
And I'll
And she
be so
sat with you
grateful
all
for
night, didn't
that.
she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the day that she was there all night long, and just didn't want me. And the day of Lonnie's memorial, even though my friend Lori couldn't be there, she sent me an email, and she said, "I just pray that you remember that He's still God, the same yesterday, today, and in the future. He's still sovereign. He has not left you nor forsaken you. He's still a good God. He's still the Father of all compassion and comfort. His promises, all of them are still true. He still has a plan for you, amazing and complete. He still loves you, his precious daughter, and so do I." Just being reminded of things that, you know, when your life feels like it's falling apart, but to just remember that God is still loves you, and he's still there with you. And then another friend, she sent me, my friend Donna from Northern California, she sent me a bracelet that I wore for probably for years, and then I finally passed it on to someone who I felt like needed it, and it had the verse on it. It says, "I will never leave you or forsake you." And that was written on the verse, just to know that God would never leave me or forsake me. And that was just a really sweet thing. But I would look at that verse, and it would give me that verse on my wrist, on that bracelet, and it would just give me hope.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing that you passed that on. Well,
Someone needed hope.
yeah.
So,
And so then after you settled in California, and you know, like you said, you don't want to be like that person, like, well, I'm fine now, and you'll get over it. You know, a lot of years passed, and you did get remarried, and you remarried somebody that had also lost his wife, so you definitely have that common
right.
background. And I know I was talking to you the other day, and I just wanted to mention this account. There's an account on Instagram, and I believe she has a book out now, and I'll link to it. One Fit Widow is what it's called, and she lost her husband suddenly, and her kids were little, and then she did get remarried some years later, and just she talks so much about how just, you know, that love for the first spouse will never die. It will never die. And that there's room for both. And, you know, a lot of people can't understand that. Like, well, I will never get remarried, or I would never, whatever. And I think just like you said, you were open to blessings. You were open to God doing something new in your life when the time was right. And so you did just get remarried last year, or was it year before?
2016.
Yeah. So
in October. Yeah. And I'm Kathy, Mark's wife. She was battling bravely battling pancreatic cancer, and I was one of her friends. Mark was an acquaintance, and she did something that I will never forget, how brave and wonderful it was what she did. She had different friends, 7 friends, I believe it was, who each day they would come in, be with her for about half an hour, and pray with her, read scripture, or, you know, she might have the scripture open to something that she would want them to read, but we would always pray together. And it was about half an hour, because that's about all she could do. And then we would go. It's kind of a sweet story that as she had a long, like 16 months battle, and she told her husband at the very end, at one point, she said, "I really want you to get to know Christine." And then he was like, we can't go there, you know, because he was just an acquaintance. He was just the person who I would get in touch with to know when to come and visit Kathy. And then she said, later on, she said, "Mark, I don't want you to be alone long. You've grieved so much with me going through this, and I really want you to get to know, I really have to talk about this. I want you to get to know Christine."
Oh, wow.
And and so on the very last time I went to visit her, she looked at me, and Kathy said, "We had a meeting, and we decided that Mark shouldn't be alone long." And she just stared right in my eyes.
Goodness.
So she sent these messages of love. I just think about how her love for her husband and was just so precious, you know. And and because I had gone through losing my spouse, then Mark and I got to, we were able to converse about losing our spouses and just walking through that. And Yeah. And we really just believed that God brought us together, but also we believed that Kathy had a sweet hand in that, which is,
that's incredible.
it's so remarkable. And it's sometimes I still can't believe that how much her love, and she was an amazing woman. She's, oh my Lord,
Wow.
she's such a wonderful person. And, I know she's having such a wonderful time with Jesus now, and is very missed by her children and her grandchildren as well.
You have all
but
this big blended family and lots of little ones, it sounds like.
Yes, yeah. So that's how that all came about.
I'm so happy for you. Well, and I think the other thing I was going to ask you, I know, you touched briefly on that you lost a granddaughter this past year, and it's just like, I look at your family and I think they've been through so much. It's, it's not fair. Mm-hmm. And the way you guys have coped with that and grieved. And I think too, if you look back to your young self and knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself? Would you warn yourself, or would you just say, hang in there? Or what would you say if you had that opportunity?
I remember as a young person in Milespouse, Montana, riding my bike down the middle of the street, singing at the top of my lungs, "The joy of the Lord is my strength." And now my son Jeremy, every night when he puts his boys to bed, that verse, "The joy of the Lord is my strength," they all say that before they say their prayers to go to sleep at night. And I have that verse hanging on my bathroom, "The joy of the Lord is my strength." So in the difficult times, I don't even understand it, because sometimes there's just, you feel like there's no joy whatsoever. When we lost Ruby, it was just, she's still, we're still grieving her loss, and we love her so much. And I just pray that, whatever that means, the joy of the Lord is my strength. I just feel like God somehow just gives us what we need for each day, and a little bit of, as we just seek Him and trust in Him and hope in Him and hope in the future, because I just think heaven is just going to be so amazing. And I just wonder what God has in store for us. That's the thing also that just keeps me going. But that verse, I don't know why that verse was always, it seemed to be one of my life verses, but it has been, and I believe it will be, and I hope, and I just pray that I remember that always. I think you do. When I think of the joy of the Lord, I think the joy of the Lord is not talking about my joy whatsoever. It's talking about His joy. His joy. He takes joy in His children, and His joy in little Ruby. And, so it's not dependent on any kind of joy that I conjure up, but it's His joy, and that's what's our strength. So I'm so thankful.
And you live it well. And I think that's an amazing note to end on, because you are such a good example of truly living out what you believe, letting God work through you, and just trusting. And I really think that your message will touch other people going through hard times. I really, really do. So,
I pray it does. And
thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it, Chris.
It's been good being here, Jen. Thank you.
And again, if you want to read more, find out more about Chris, you can find her, or Christine. I always call her Christine. You can find her.
It's okay.
notesbychristine.blogspot.com. And like I said, we'll link any books or anything that we talked about in the show notes that you can find later. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll talk to you next week.
Connect with Jen at jenmcdonald.net or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also purchase her book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Love the show? Don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Until next time, have a great week.